Hi, I'm Justin.
Also, I hate the way my voice sounds, so if you can do whatever Photoshop does to voices, make me sound awesome.
And this is my lovely friend,
The beauty in the eyes of the beholder, and it's just about getting into the seat of being the beholder.
Hayley.
I don't think you have to be particularly perceptive. I just think you have to look up.
This podcast is mostly just her telling me stories.
If you expose yourself to the possibility that this might be really awkward, there can be something just really cool on the other side of it.
She thinks that her life and way of looking at things are
Oh, I was kind of waiting on you. I thought you were getting your stuff ready. You're waiting on me?
pretty normal.
You got to edit out all the misinformation about the Amish.
Maybe you can relate
I would like a chance to re-sing the Amish Paradise.
if you want lighthearted stories
All right, you want to talk about goats?
and stream of consciousness.
I just woke up and needed some friends, and so I bought them.
Then you're gonna like the Sunny Side Up podcast.
Sunny side up, sunny side up, sunny side up, sunny side up.
So, if you're at all like me, you may feel that you're living in a world that can be a bit overwhelming and confusing at times. I'm also a huge fan of podcasts, documentaries, docudramas, stories, and of just information in general. Between all of that and the social media and news, sometimes our brains can feel like they're on overload. Hayley and I hope that this podcast can be something of an antidote to all of that. Like little jello shots of joy and distraction. None of it is too serious or really too informative. Mostly it's just two friends who have conversational chemistry talking about whatever enters the minds of relatively ADHD people. We hope you enjoy. One of the big movie producers, if I thought of his name, he does like expose movie type of things, or not expose, but like really,
Michael Moore documentaries?
No, I think it's movies though. Anyways, doing flashing back to John Kennedy's murder, is doing a big either movie or series on some newly uncovered and like reprocessing John Kennedy's killing, and kind of the usual suspects, tying in like probably the mafia, probably Johnson, his vice president, who was always suspected to have had some whatever, and probably the CIA, because I think John Kennedy, John Kennedy, whatever it was, he had kind of stood up to the CIA and was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna take you down a peg or two," and they weren't thrilled about it. Anyways, I wish I can remember who that is and what they're doing, but I've heard that there's a movie that's going to come out probably in this year,
That's
24.
kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be good. It should be a good one.
Again, I didn't grow up knowing much about mob. I am new to this table. But the FBI was so committed to bringing down the mob, and the fact that the mob was giving so much power to the Kennedys, and trying to get them into office. I can absolutely see where would the CIA have taken him out? Yeah, the CIA was not the FBI, but to the extent that they might have had some common goals of trying to take out certain things, it would be like mob versus government. Would they take out the mob's candidate? Absolutely. Not candidate at that point, but person.
Yeah.
Like you could have a lot of fun with Kennedy theories. I just didn't ever know enough about it to even have a conversation. I've got some friends that's their hyperfixation, and they can do with it what I do.
His is the most obvious, that whatever there's almost no chance that the official narrative is the real narrative. Like,
right.
There's theories that are, there's the people that believe that there's no such thing as birds, that in the 1950s or whatever it was, some secret government program took over all the birds and turned them into basically drones. That's a funny one. There's the flat earthers. There's, the people who believe that 9/11 was an inside job. There's all those ones. And all of them are fascinating. Like if you give a good conspiracy theory like a run through, they should at least make you question like whatever the story is. Then there's like the John Kennedy assassination, and it's not even like, oh, that's plausible. No, it was never a good story. It wasn't like whatever whatever their storyline was, it never was convincing to me. It was always like, no, there's for sure something else going on here, or more going on here, at least.
Like, what was Lee Harvey Oswald's nexus to the situation in the first place? Why would he care that much?
Right. Was it even him? The way the head moved?
Shooters.
Yeah, exactly. There's just too much other stuff going on. It was just like, okay, it wasn't a good explanation in the first place. Whereas, let's say we never landed on the moon. Let's say it wasn't an inside job at 9/11. They at least did a hell of a good job putting it all together, and it's all pretty believable. I'm relatively certain that we did land on the moon. I'm relatively certain that, it was Middle Eastern.
Thank you for confirming
extreme,
like your actual position.
I'm saying, like, if I'm being spoofed, they did a good job with Jack Kennedy. I just don't think they did a great job. If that's the thing.
Not
so
a very convincing
it's a
theory.
great. That story deserves like digging because it's obvious there's something more there. That's my point.
Hey, some of my students who really liked conspiracy theorists and
Yeah.
leaned into it and believed it all
Yeah.
had mentioned, he was like, hey, I think you'll find this interesting. And he sent me a link to some recently declassified documents related to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which you mentioned
Oh yeah.
not too long ago. And it was like documents explaining how we can handle this. And it was things like, we'll make everyone in the United States so suspicious of Cuba, or we'll make them believe these things. And it was a game plan for how to have people so anti-Cuba that they would fully support this crazy brazen action that we're about to take. Like, if we convince them of all these nutty things and tell them these false news stories, then they'll be totally on board with ratifying whatever action it is that we have to take, and that's how we can keep the population satisfied with it. So we can talk about, you mentioned the Cuban Missile Crisis and how Kennedy handled it and how brilliant it was. I am going to go back through my emails and find the link to that and send it to you so that you can decide if that's a conspiracy that you'd anytime somebody was like, look at these recently declassified documents, I'm like, okay, sure, because it's stamped at the top.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's not a far-fetched, because that's exactly the game plan that we follow.
Well, yeah, like it would make sense to, like, going back to World War II, there is a reasonable, it's still a conspiracy theory, clearly, because it's not been admitted to by the highest levels of government, but there's some reasonable evidence that suggests that it was Roosevelt that was in, who was in office? Who was the dude in the wheelchair? FDR. Yeah, Roosevelt, yeah, thank you. That he had been trying to get the U.S. involved in World War II, because obviously in 1939, the Germans are just running all over Europe, doing whatever they wanted to do. And he was like, guys, this is a real problem. Like, it's eventually going to come to our shores. It's bad for us, whatever. And that 4 days before the Japs actually managed to fully get to Pearl Harbor and do the dirty, he was given intel. Some people at the very highest level were aware that they were coming and that they were probably going to attack. And it was like, what do we do? And supposedly Roosevelt was like, you know what? Let them do their little thing. It's going to cause some damage, but it's also going to galvanize the old waking the sleeping giant. It's like, this giant needs to be woken up. So kind of in that same frame of like, okay, we've got to get the American people to move off of their current popular stance, which back then was isolationism. I could see a case being made for the CIA and whatever around Jack Kennedy if they were trying to push a proxy war with Russia by going after Cuba. It would make sense to sell the American people on like how dangerous and bad and horrible whatever was going on in Cuba was, to get them ready for potential war with essentially Russia on the on Cuba's shores. That makes perfect sense to me.
Sure.
That doesn't feel like it may just be a false conspiracy, but that's not like all the birds are drones to me.
No, the only part of that might have been conspiracy was that they actually reduced it to paper and said, here's our game plan. It's definitely what they did. It's whether or not they put it in a document and then declassified it.
Listen, you ever start going through, if you ever listen to CIA and some of those other like alphabet agencies that are in sort of that, classified intelligence world, one of the things they'll say is there's almost no idea when they're working through things. And I think the agency and some of those, I think they've grown up a little bit, matured, but especially in the old days, they took any idea and they would write them down. So I remember basically what I'm saying is there was one guy who was talking about, he's like, if you have heard that during XYZ time, there was floating an idea to do and fill in the blank craziest thing you've ever heard, there was somebody in the room throwing that out there. Like, you remember like DARPA, there was the movie called The Men, it was like something, it was a long name, like The Men Who Stare at Goats. And I was like, yeah, they kill goats by staring at them or whatever it was. It was, yeah. Anyways, there was a DARPA. DARPA is, of course, a really fun, neat arm of the Army where they just think of crazy stuff. And at one point, they were using the idea of mind control. And supposedly there were at least one or two people that could kill an animal by thinking about it. And yeah. And we're trying to teach like our operatives how to do that. And there was remote viewing has always been a thing for like decades and decades and decades where you put your head down at your desk and you go and remote view whatever's going on. And they've used that intelligence in different situations when we didn't have satellites and other things to help like find people that were either hostages or bad guys that were underground. Anyways, I say all that to say, like when you get into especially like that super murky world of like where anything goes, crazy ideas get floated, and that's part of like what that is. I think what the back to what this like CIA officer was saying is like just because those ideas are floated, you're hoping that whoever is at the top of the project, who's in control of that particular operation, is not going to choose the most crazy. And I think the CIA has been, over the last couple of decades, has been maturing and trying to, weed out the particularly terrible ideas from actually being put into action.
I wonder if that reform action was happening before or after they tried to put spy equipment inside of a cat. Like they tried to put spy equipment inside of cats and then have the cats go sit next to whoever it was they were trying to spy on.
All of that was
like
the
millions
CIA
and millions of dollars,
yeah.
But then the cat got hit by a car on the way to its destination. And also, you can't really train a cat to go sit where you want it to. You can train a dog, but a cat is like
its own thing.
I'm my own boss. Like you ain't the boss of me. I'm my own man. But yeah, I want to say that cat maybe got hit by a car and it was like $1.5 million down the toilet. It was some kind of tremendous waste.
Annoying.
But
yeah.
When did we start trying to have better ideas in the CIA? Before or after that?
I don't know. I just.
And then what was the other? Oh, it was such an epic failure. Help me think. Tell me what I'm thinking. Explosives on bats, perhaps, and they thought because bats hang in creepy places, so they could go to this abandoned warehouse or whatever, and they could detonate by this. Remotely detonate whatever the explosive thing is that's in a bat, but they forgot the fact that they come back to their regular location and whoopsie, it's like boomerang, whoopsie. You didn't even think about that. I would have to we need to Google that and get to the bottom of what that story was. Did I just butcher that? But
no, that's
but using animals for spy and CIA type purposes and it backfiring in a major way and then losing millions of dollars worth of research. And it's like, where's the guy that says, maybe not this idea, y'all? Like, let's rein it back in.
Yeah, I know. I was so torn, though, when I was listening to this guy go on about just, like, the creativity that they, like, part of me was like, oh, like, you only hear it spun as, like, oh, what a bunch of idiots. And, of course, it's so, I read the book Inside the CIA, which I think it's called Inside the CIA. Sorry. My mouth isn't working. But they said about that book, it was kind of surprising that it got through. Like they allowed it and they kind of hoped it was going to become like a bomb and nobody would ever read it. But anyways, one of the, I don't remember it super well, but he talked in there just about how buttoned up and how professional and all that stuff the CIA is. But I do think in the early years, and also when you get in, again, like DARPA and some of these others, they get into some really creative stuff. And it is that kind of catch-22 of like, wow, so there is this place where they will consider, wiring a cat up or using like really unconventional stuff to get like really hard to get people or things done. I don't know, there's a kind of charm to it. You can make fun of them because we're familiar with the failures, but I know what I was going to say. The Inside the CIA guy said the most frustrating thing about being in the CIA, to some extent, if you're on the PR side of the CIA, is you're only ever going to talk about your failures. That's what you have to deal with, because the 98% of the time that the CIA is successful, and maybe it's 95% was his number, nobody knows.
And maybe they're successful 98% of the time, but their objectives were usually so corrupt that I would not have wanted them to be successful.
Right.
Like, our CIA is not where my heart finds its rest.
Right.
Like, we have a lot to atone for.
Yeah.
And a lot of it came through their hands. But props to them for thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
Like, where Disney Imagineers meets government. Like, I love the creativity. Throw something against the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah. That's the DARPA guys with, the men who stare at goats. I think that was the... George Clooney was in it. The Men Who Stare at Goats.
That vaguely sounds familiar.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever saw it, but
it was like a funny, farcical kind of movie. But then it lets you know, like, hey, there's a lot of truth in these stories. We're just not going to tell you which ones.
Okay, that's fun. That's fun.
It's fascinating.
I would probably have to tune into that. I love that creativity can still be celebrated in some capacity, because I feel like we lose a lot. We've lost a lot. The older you get, the less creative you are. And if we could keep the same creativity that we had in elementary school, I feel like we'd all be so much better at our jobs and our lives. I love that the CIA gives those guys room to do that.
Yeah.
Oh, what a nice outlet.
Yeah. And like I said, and maybe it's... I heard an episode recently of a podcast where a DARPA guy was being interviewed, and that feels like the true, like, Wild West and, like, exciting. Like, that would be a fun job. I think the CIA, kind of from what I've understood, has had to become more of, like, boring, regimented, grown up, mature, whatever. But DARPA is still, like, 100%. Like, they are just, like...
think outside the box.
Very much. Like, they're exploring AI right now, all the stuff, because they have to. And that would be, like, a really fun... That'd be a fun job.
I would be so bad at it because, like I said, all my creativity got diluted over the course of time. Like, I don't think I've done anything creative since maybe the 4th or 5th grade.
Hello, lovely friends. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. And it would mean the world if you would tell other people about this podcast, and maybe even spam your social media accounts with just how much you're enjoying it. If you are, of course. Also, commenting and rating us on whatever platform you're downloading or streaming from is incredibly helpful to a little startup podcast like this one. On the other hand, if you are dissatisfied with your listening experience, please leave all of that hate on someone else's podcast. Just maybe to confuse them a little bit, right? But most of all, we hope you keep looking up and looking for the sunny side of life.